Nobody knows how it started, but it was definitely celebrated in medieval Europe. At least 4 countries take credit for starting it, and it's sometimes traced back to a pope.
Potpourri.
Other times it's traced back to paganism, but the April Fool's Day rituals of disruption and mayhem, right when the seasons are changing, is actually a theme found in cultures all around the world, not just Europe.
April Fools is about pagans, Pope, multiculturalism, and mayhem? It's a wonder they don't spell fool with 2 UUs.
That
To
would be
use.
4 U's. Who are you, anyway?
Who are you, anyway?
Many theories trace the origins of April Fools to a snafu with calendars. A little over 2,000 years ago, in the year 46 BC, Julius Caesar established the Julian calendar, making January 1st the beginning of the year. But a few hundred years later, as Christianity was spreading throughout Europe, there was a movement to change the new year to a date that had religious significance, like connecting it to the birth or the resurrection of Jesus. Some countries did make that change, but others kept January 1st, trying to justify it by saying that it was the day Jesus was circumcised. It was probably a stretch.
I'll say.
It was a stretch, especially when you consider that all indications in the Bible point to a spring birth for Jesus, not a winter one. Shepherds were watching their flocks at night, not something they would have been doing in the freezing nights Judea experienced in December.
Also too cold for circumcisions.
And his birth story includes a census, which, if we accept as a historical and not a metaphorical idea, also probably would not have been undertaken in the winter with the roads impassable with ice and snow. So, according to the hints in the Bible, it's more likely Jesus was born in the summer or fall. What happened is that as Christianity spread throughout Europe, the birth of Jesus began to be celebrated on December 25th, so the holiday would overtake the winter pagan celebrations that people loved. Anyway, circumcision day or not,
How about not?
some countries adopted Easter as the new year, while others kept January 1st. Meanwhile, that old Julian calendar had some glitches that caused the seasons to diverge from the calendar over time. Pretty soon, Europe was in disarray, with different countries celebrating different New Years. This is where a pope comes in. According to the Pope theory, April Fools began when Pope Gregory XIII issued a decree in 1582, ordering Christian nations to adopt the Gregorian calendar, named after his truly. The new calendar would move the beginning of the year from the end of March back to the 1st of January. People who did not make the change and who continued to mark the new year in April were called April Fools and ridiculed. Hence, the legend goes, that became a thing. Meanwhile, according to the Museum of Hoaxes, in France, they had already adopted the calendar that way, 18 years before Pope Gregory's decree, and they played pranks on people who kept the old dates, often by pinning a paper fish on their backs. People who had this prank played on them were called Poissons d'Avril, or April Fish. April Fish is still the name for April Fools in France. That's just your tale. So, the ancient church didn't invent April Fools, but they might have had something to do with it. Other people think that April Fools is linked to the medieval church's Feast of Fools, which had the reputation of being, as the historian Max Harris puts it, a disorderly, even transgressive Christian festival in which reveling clergy elected a burlesque lord of misrule who presided over the divine office wearing animal masks or women's clothes, sang obscene songs, swung censers that gave off foul-smelling smoke, played dice at the altar, and otherwise parodied the liturgy of the church. No song. You should be glad we don't have any stinky censers lying around. If that weren't enough, revelers would then leave the church and they would take to the streets, howling, issuing mock indulgences, hurling manure at bystanders, and staging humorously insulting plays. The Feast of Fools, in turn, was said to have grown out of the pagan festival of Saturnalia.
Oh man, you can't throw a rock at a Catholic without hitting a pagan.
Hey!
Hay is for horses.
Saturnalia was the ancient Roman festival, kind of a carnival, in which social norms were overturned. Masters would provide table service to their slaves, people wore masks and inappropriate clothing, gambled, overate, got drunk, and generally went berserk, in a way that felt manageable enough if it was limited to 1 day per year.
Just one.
But you can see how, with the New Year's date kerfuffle, they became linked with April Fools in people's mind. Long story short.
Too late.
We don't know where it came from, but it made sense to a lot of people. And the idea that foolishness can be useful, that fools have a valuable role to play for humankind, is a very ancient idea. Call it the holy fool.
And now.
What?
Oh, she's gonna do it.
What?
The pivot?
You mean to the point of the sermon?
Yeah.
Is that noticeable? Sheesh. In Judaism, the prophets were often considered foolish or mad by their fellow villagers for challenging social norms in their dramatic fashion. And heroes of the Hebrew Bible sometimes behave foolishly as they develop in their lives, growing into wisdom.
I actually want to hear this.
In one story, Jacob, the son of Abraham, cheats his brother and lies to his father. He exiles himself, only to come crawling back later. In the Christian scriptures, Jesus tells his disciples that unless they become like little children, they'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Many people think that Jesus is talking about innocence when he says that he's saying people have to be pure of sin. But Jesus cavorted with lots of sinners. He offered companionship and healing to people normally considered untouchable or unredeemable. Some considered him a fool for doing things like hanging out with lepers and tax collectors.
Or asses.
Fair enough. Jesus' message turned the usual social norms upside down. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He said that to people who usually would have been blamed for their condition, like if they were poor, they must have deserved it, or if they were weak or ill, they must have been impure. Jesus celebrated those people as people with inherent worth and dignity. So when Jesus told his disciples to become like children, I don't think he was talking about purity. I think he was challenging them not to think they know everything. In other words, to know their own foolishness. Later, the Apostle Paul tells Christians that God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise, and he characterizes apostles such as himself as fools for Christ. Islam has the legendary trickster Nasruddin. He was a real person, a Sufi leader who lived in the 13th century. He was known as the people's philosopher. He was especially known for his funny stories, which often had little lessons hidden in them. Ever since his death, he's become sort of a legend, as people retold his funny stories and new ones with him as the main character, like this one. One day, a thief came to the house of Nasruddin and took everything he had except the blanket which covered him. When Nasruddin saw the thief carrying all his things away, he put his blanket over his shoulders and followed him. When the thief arrived at his own house, he turned back and saw Nasruddin. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "What am I doing here?" asked Nasruddin. "You ask a thing like that? Didn't we move to your house?" This story is called Immigrant.
Oh.
Yes, donkey.
I don't get it. Is Nasruddin the immigrant?
Yes, a thief steals the things he needs to live, so he immigrates into the thief's house, and the thief is surprised and offended by this.
Are you talking about our country?
Many of Nasruddin's stories will preach, as we ministers say. Buddhism has its own holy fools, too, including Taegu Ryokan, an 18th century monk and a Zen poet who was notorious for getting distracted by the present moment. He would be doing a chore and see children playing, and suddenly he would be off playing with them. He played hide and seek and tag, and he especially loved to play dead for the children, who would bury him in leaves. Once he was caught playing marbles with a geisha, and legend has it that he could not resist a game of Go. He constantly misplaced things, too. In one of his poems, he declared the, quote, way of the fool, writing, "With no mind, flowers lure the butterfly. With no mind, the butterfly visits the blossoms. Yet when flowers bloom, the butterfly comes. When the butterfly comes, the flowers bloom." In Buddhism, no mind means not being attached to things that are impermanent. Mindlessness can also seem foolish, and by taking it to hilarious extremes, Taegu Ryokan delighted people while teaching them a memorable lesson. Finally, we contemporary UUs have the Faithful Fools, a ministry in San Francisco that was started by a UU minister and a Franciscan nun. They named themselves the Fools after the tradition in medieval times of having a fool, who was a kind of a truth teller, in the king's court. The character of the fool would say things that otherwise could not be said. Faithful Fools do street theater performances in which they bring justice issues to the attention of passers-by and people in power. So far, in this message, we have several images of the fool, as one who turns social norms upside down or speaks truth to power, as one who makes mistakes on the path to greatness, as one who is not hobbled by a false sense of wisdom. Like the Lord of Misrule, the fool may don a mask and may mock a leader or even a minister to keep her humble. But the fool is also an everyday person. That's right. We all have a little bit of donkey in us. The novelist Tom Robbins says that we are all fools, and the fool's journey is our own journey. However, he says, quote, "We should make a distinction between fools, capital F, and fools, lowercase f. A fool with a capital F is a person who's searching, growing, changing, and actively participating in the human whoop-jamboree-hoo." He continues, "A fool with a lowercase f is a person who has shut down, who has reached a nice, comfortable plateau and stopped there, not thinking very deeply, not feeling very much, just consuming and watching television, clinging desperately to the old values and cliches he or she was once spoon-fed in early life." He concludes, "The uppercase fool, on the other hand, is a piece of working evolution, complete with trials, errors, and ridiculous pratfalls. The lowercase fool isn't necessarily a moron, but rather a robot, a zombie, a drone." I see what Robbins is getting at here, that there's a wise foolishness and a foolish foolishness, and that the difference between them is growth. It's a matter of how awake, alive, and engaged we are. There's some wisdom to this, and yet I'm not so sure about this clean line he draws between the two kinds of fools. I want to complicate that notion a little bit, because it's partly right, and it's also not quite true. Most of the people I know are both kinds of fool. Sometimes we are engaged in the tumbling, churning, learning, growing, changing, whoop-jamboree-hoo, and sometimes we retreat because we are exhausted from all that, or because we need the universe to give us a good hard nudge before we can get with the program. And so we retreat into safety, into a smaller personal world, and, binge watch Netflix with a pan of nachos.
Step away from Angela's nachos, Tom Robbins.
Sometimes shutting down from learning and growing for a while is a conscious decision, and sometimes it is not, even for us thoughtful UUs. But sometimes stumbling around with old values or cliches that don't suit us anymore really is a productive kind of trial or error in itself. Who is anyone else to judge which stumbling is foolish with a capital F and which stumbling is just
stupid?
less fruitful? You don't know what you don't know until you finally know it. It's like the refrain from an old Buddhist story. If you know it, say it with me. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, who knows? The meaning of any particular time or episode in our lives develops and changes over time. There's one more thing, and this is a big one. The same person can be an uppercase fool in one area of their life and a lowercase fool in another area of their life at the same time. We all flow from uppercase fool to lowercase fool and back again. So the fool is a part of ourselves. The question is, can we trust it?
No, we can't.
Yes, we can.
No, we can't.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
No, we can't. Wait a second. We are afraid of looking foolish, aren't we? When I was in my 20s, I remember when I did an internship at Oregon State Penitentiary, a men's maximum security prison. And in the orientation, they warned us over and over again that inmates would try to trick us. And they told us stories of people who had been duped into believing an inmate who was lying. When I started the internship, I was so afraid of being fooled by a cunning inmate that I hardly spoke to anybody there. My supervisor, a Buddhist chaplain, figured out why I was nervous, and she said, "So what if someone lies to you and you believe them? You're not going to break any rules, so what's the worst that could happen? You'd look like a fool. So what?" She said, if someone fools you, don't give them any power by letting it get you upset. I had already foolishly given that power away, and no one had had to do a thing. We are afraid of our inner fool, afraid that, like the jester in the king's court, it will reveal a humbling or inconvenient truth about ourselves, or will embarrass us. And yet, it is okay to make a fool of ourselves. It's even necessary if we're going to grow and deepen in our lives and become wise fools. It's better not to take ourselves too seriously. So, go ahead and laugh at yourself. Forgive yourself. Go on with your head held high. Go on with your head held as high as your head goes. May you play, may you embrace some risk in life, may you get caught up in the present, and sometimes go ahead and put the whoops in whoop jamboree-hoo. How about a hug, donkey? Aw, thanks.
We invite you to rise in body and spirit to join us. We'll invite the band up to join us in our closing song. This is a song by a contemporary singer-songwriter, but the words are based on the poet Rumi, who's a bit of a fool in the Sufi world.
Well, we've come to a place where everything is music. Everything is music. Well, we've come to a place where everything is music. Everything middle of your heart. Let go your hand and sit down in the circle. You got no power to keep yourself apart. Well, the day you wake up sad, don't go back to sleep. No, no, don't go back to sleep. No, no, don't go back to sleep. Wake up sad and empty. Don't go back to sleep. There's only places kneel and kiss the ground. Don't worry now about saving all the songs. There's plenty more just waiting to be found. And if all these instruments should disappear, people still hear something warming up from way down in the ground. To the place where everything is music, yeah, yeah, everything is music, yeah, everything is music. We go to the place where everything is music, everything is music, let it play. Everything is music, let it play.
Go in peace, friends, and may love and laughter bless your days until we are gathered again. Blessed be.